Am I the butthole for kicking my brother-in-law out and reporting my therapist? Let me explain. Even though I don't like to talk about it. I, male, 25, was involved in an auto accident. I was the one driving, and lost my dad who was with me at the time. I had untreated PTSD for nearly a year. I couldn't speak about it to anyone. My sister got me in therapy 2 months ago because she said that I needed it. This is our first holidays without Dad, and I wasn't intending on doing anything this year, but the family decided to come and spend time with me. My aunt, my cousin and her kids, my sister and my brother-in-law, and my mom. My brother-in-law started bringing up the accident in detail, exactly the way I describe it, like he heard it from me, the number of sessions I've attended so far. Brought up the name of my therapist and asked if he's the one I've been seeing. Then he started asking me how I'm doing / if my therapy sessions are benefiting me or not / and telling the exact time I got into therapy. And then casually said that I shouldn't tell people that I feel responsibility for what happened, implying that I told my therapist that. I was taken aback. I asked how he knew all that. My sister said she didn't tell him and I didn't tell anyone. My brother-in-law looked confused when he noticed how upset I was and said that it was a coincidence the therapist happens to be one of his friend's brother. He's known my therapist for 5 years and that's how he knew, since his friend said my name sounded familiar. I was shocked. Everyone was looking at me and my aunt started talking about me, telling everyone about the accident. I was so infuriated I found myself lashing out at my brother-in-law, and he started talking about how I need to deal my anger issues, disregarding that he told the entire family about my sessions. After arguing with him and listening to him blaming me for how I reacted, I ended up telling him to leave. My sister sided with him, then they both left. My aunt defended him and said that I shouldn't have yelled at him and hurt my sister's feelings. That he was just worried about me. I was so mad, especially when they all started guilt-tripping me and berating me for what I did. I sent my therapist an email telling him what happened after I couldn't get a hold of him, and mentioned that I will be reporting him and file a complaint against him for disclosing information without my consent. So far I haven't heard from him, and what bothers me is that I'm not close with those people, and hearing them gossip about me like that is not okay. My brother-in-law has always been like this, but it never occurred to me that he'd do this. The family said I ruined dinner for them and that I overreacted and was lashing out at everyone for no reason. I feel terrible. They said they gathered to comfort me and I caused a scene. NTA, your therapist definitely should be reported and hopefully lose their license. Therapists should never be sharing their clients' names, much less going into detail about what the clients are sharing with them. The people who ruin dinner are the people who decided to spend time with you and then did not stop your brother-in-law from deciding to share what is going on with your therapy to the rest of your family. You rightfully wish that your privacy be valued, but he couldn't be bothered to show you that respect. The person who ruined dinner was your brother-in-law, and everyone who sided with him. You're right. Part of me believes he did it on purpose. This isn't the first time he gets involved in personal matters, and I'm not sure if he shared with other friends and how long they've been gossiping about what I've experienced. I believe, like you, that he did it on purpose as well. But please remember, the person most to blame in this situation is your therapist. If I am understanding the timeline correctly, your sister found you a therapist, who just happened to be related to your brother-in-law's friend, then the therapist mentioned your name to his friend, and this led to the therapist sharing a bunch of information about you with brother-in-law and he sharing it with the rest of the people at dinner. Understand that there is a very narrow set of circumstances where a therapist can ethically share the fact that you are their client, not even mentioning anything about your therapy, and someone being related to you isn't one of them, unless you yourself have given written permission for that specific relative to be apprised. You didn't do that. If the therapist had not been disclosing, there would not have been a problem. Yes, and when the therapist is in a situation where they know they might interact with people who know you regularly, they are supposed to refer you to someone else. I had a psychiatrist decline to see me because my mom worked for the same hospital system and technically had access to my chart, but it would have been electronically logged if she did look at it and could have gotten her fired. When I was seeing the school therapist, she said she couldn't acknowledge me in the hallway unless I did so first, since us knowing each other would essentially disclose I was her client. She also had to know the name of my abuser so she didn't accidentally treat them at the same time as me. Confidentially is no joke. That's what my therapist told me as well. Said that if we met in public she wouldn't acknowledge me unless I said hi to her first. We've met in public and she's kept true to that. When I was in grad school it was the same. They had some of the school therapists come and talk to the classes about seeking help if they get too stressed. My person therapist was there and she had kept not acknowledging me, and I was confused for a couple of minutes and then realized why. She started to talk and the whole class acted disinterested, because no one wants to let their classmates know they're struggling. So when she started to stumble, I just said, "Hey Remy." She's my favorite person in the whole school. I've been seeing her since undergrad. And just chatted her up. I'm not embarrassed about needing therapy. She came and found me later in the day and thanked me. She ended recommending me as a mental health advocate to represent the whole university and was great for my resume. One of my psych teachers used to work in a small town. She said there were very strict rules she made her family follow to uphold her clients' privacy if they approached her at the grocery store or something. Like her family wasn't allowed to ask her how she knew them. One of her clients had been on her daughter's softball team, and she'd just walk up to her daughter and tell her, "Tell your mom I need to call her," like she didn't even care who knew. Oh wow, that's cool. I used to be super worried that my therapist would be treating my abuser too, since I knew my abuser saw a therapist but had no idea who. I never had a therapist ask me my abuser's name for a situation like that though. Maybe it's because I have a lot of other things to talk about, so our sessions don't focus on the abuser much. But a few years ago, I started seeing therapists outside of my town, so I no longer really have to worry about it. Same with me. I work in the same hospital system than my psychiatrist. He sees me in his private practice and have never encountered him at the hospital, but he asked me for my consent in case we saw each other in the hallways if I wanted him to acknowledge me or not. I talked about a hobby of mine in therapy early on, and my therapist immediately said, "I need to disclose to you that I also share that hobby and am also involved in some local hobbyist groups. Should we run into each other at any meetings or events, I cannot acknowledge you unless you approach me first. I don't want you to be offended and think I'm ignoring you. I just want to protect your right to privacy and will not ever disclose how we know each other. Privacy is a big effing deal. HIPAA exists for a reason, and ops therapist has blatantly violated it." This, 1000%. When I started therapy, my therapist explained the same thing. If we saw each other, I could come up to her and say hi, but she couldn't do the same, and not to take offense. This is a huge breach of HIPAA that is taught in Counseling 101. Op. I hope you know your NTA, and that reporting is the right call, but I implore you to try and find a new, actually ethical therapist who can help you. I briefly dated someone seeing the same therapist as me. We were both established clients before the relationship, so she didn't drop either of us but said she couldn't discuss the other unless we brought it up, and she couldn't share anything we had told her to the other one. That's an interesting situation. I'm curious, did it have any adverse negatives or positives to your relationship while together? I wonder if the therapist was like, hold on, before you change your FB statuses, let me just read through our entire privacy statement to find a loophole. Understand that there is a very, very narrow set of circumstances where a therapist can ethically share the fact that you are their client. Yeah, when I was seeing a therapist, one of the things she told me is that she was not legally allowed to let anyone know she knew me. If we bumped into each other on the street, unless I approached and talked to her first, she was legally required to act as if she'd never met me before. I doubt that's the case in every country, but they definitely take this very seriously here. Yep, and if a therapist and their client are both at a social function and end up being introduced by a third party, unless the client says something like, "Oh, I know, therapist's name," then the therapist is supposed to say, "I'm very pleased to meet you." As if you are meeting a complete stranger for the first time. When I worked for CPS, similar confidentiality, and I called a client, unless their voicemail specifically said it was theirs, and theirs alone, not "You've reached the Smith family," I wasn't even allowed to identify myself as a CPS worker, because if for some reason it wasn't the right number, that would out the client to that random number as being involved with us. Got pretty awkward, but you learn your way around it. Exactly this. I ran into my therapist at a library when I was a teenager and was so upset when they didn't acknowledge me, but the next session we had they explained that they weren't allowed to say anything to me unless I said something first. I majored in psych and did an internship with a therapeutic organization that works with kids. Even as an intern, this rule applied to me if I ever ran into one of the kids or parents outside of class. There is no excuse for this therapist's behavior. You are so NTA. It takes an incredible amount of courage to seek out therapy, and your therapist betrayed you. I really hope you take all these comments to heart and realize you did nothing wrong, and that you deserve so much better. And I hope you don't give up on therapy entirely. I wouldn't blame you if you did, but there really are good therapists out there who will respect your privacy. You deserve to heal, and you don't need to put up with anyone who gets in the way of that. Same. Bunch of busybodies, who have no business discussing any of this period. The therapist tells his friend tell his brother tells op's brother-in-law, and brother-in-law tells who knows who else. What a butthole. Brother-in-law and the therapist probably talked and he asked him questions about original post and it was like entertainment. What a dick. Sister definitely knew if she recommended the therapist and was probably around when they talked about him. I can't remember if it was said but I'm thinking him. I am sorry your family sucks op. Your therapist definitely effed up telling he. Be careful and document anything you can. Brother-in-law might lie and you want to be prepared. My mother has had to decline clients due to finding out they are someone who my dad works with. The client was the one who told my dad, so that's how I found out. She doesn't like having any clients that are connected in a way that could cause issues. That is very good policy. NTA, I'm sorry this happened to you. You're not the ass at all. Your therapist violated your confidentiality and that's a very serious thing. Report them and let them suffer the consequences. Focus on your betterment and it doesn't matter what others say. You didn't ruin Christmas. I really hope you're able to find peace someday. I know my brother-in-law, he's always disrespecting my boundaries, and to even think about him talking to people about personal stuff like that is incredibly infuriating. And they tell me that I need to control my anger. They're blaming me for how I reacted and they still have no idea that I'm now having an issue with my therapist. I also have family like that, so I keep minimal contact with them personally. I believe your anger is justified. I don't believe that emotions should be bottled up and suppressed. Feel what you need to feel. What your therapist did was illegal and you probably signed contracts at the beginning on the sessions about confidentially. Contact the boss as there is one, and the licensing place where the therapist is located. If they did this there's chances they did this with other clients as well. Notify your doctor and ask them to refer you to someone else after explaining the situation. Info: is your brother-in-law involved in computers, networking in some way that he is able to read the therapist's notes? It sounds really odd that one of the things he talks about with, is the exact time that you checked into therapy. That little nugget makes it sound like he's reading notes, because I can't see any way that the therapist would say, yeah, he checked in at 4:58 p.m. I am a social worker, so I know a bit about these things. You absolutely should report the therapist. That person should know better by now. If you're in the United States, you're required to get HIPAA training every year or two. If he's working with systems containing PHI, he also should have had training for HIPAA. Describing your feeling about this, in person, may be very hard to do accurately as anger and feelings shadow your thoughts, on both sides. You have every right to be super angry. Lie and share to therapist. Most remaining to your bill. Rest, still huge part, to everyone else for how they didn't shut down your bill, and how they acted. I'd write it in an email instead to each involved. Possibly involving the therapist. Let him see what did he cause and what got him fired. It's easier to write your own feelings and think it through, then let everyone slowly read it and let it sink. Then you can talk about it. And decide if you can forgive them. Don't ask for forgiveness though, since you did nothing wrong. Bill had to be shut down, had to learn to know his place. But the most important is, therapists must be suspended. Confidentiality is very important in medical field, and by far the most important force for psychiatry. You trust the doctor by revealing everything about yourself, things you don't share with your closest ones even. You do this because you trust the system, trust the confidentiality. If you, the patient, can't, then you can't speak freely, and can't get help. FFS, even a child abuser, looking for help to stop, could, should, get appointments, and if you can't trust them 110%, how could he talk about anything? And your therapist revealed everything, in detail, including your identity, to someone no more than a friend of his brother, for God's effing sake. NTA. Please update us with what ultimately happens to the therapist. Not the butthole. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. We welcome your comments below. Another of our videos will begin shortly.